here already so far, and I'm sure more will continue to join us. But I don't know about you, but I'm excited about today's session. Just want to welcome everyone to our Economy Pillar Live Expert Session with our special guest expert, Amanda Janoo. Just want to extend our heartfelt gratitude from our Executive Director, Dr. Gail Christopher, as well as our entire NCHE team. Thank you for being here and joining us. I'm actually going to hand it over to Christina, and Christina is going to share with you a little bit about what Amanda intends to cover during our time together here, as well as introduce you to Amanda so you'll know a little bit more about Amanda's background and what she or what they're bringing to the table. So Christina, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ina. We hear the term economy all the time. It dominates our news cycles and determines elections, yet many feel too intimidated to discuss the economy, let alone try and influence it. In this interactive session, we will demystify the economy by tapping into our own intuitive understandings of our current economic system versus one designed to deliver social justice on a healthy planet. We will hear about inspiring national and global initiatives working to transform our economic system and explore the question, what if we stopped treating people and planet like we're here to serve the economy and started treating the economy like it's here to serve us? So Amanda is going to help us answer those questions. Amanda is the Economics and Policy Lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and a New America Fellow. Amanda is an economic policy and economic systems change expert with decades of experience working with governments and movements around the world. Her work aims to build just and sustainable economies through movement building and participatory policy design processes. Prior to joining the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and New America, Amanda worked for the United Nations and African Development Bank as an industrial policy and structural transformation expert. As a Fulbright researcher, she explored the relationship between international trade and cooperative business structures in India. She has an MPhil from Cambridge University and heralds from the Green Mountain State of Vermont. With that, I will pass it over to you, Amanda.
Oh, thank you so much, Christina, and hi, everyone. Just feeling really excited to be with you all. I've gotten to learn a little bit about this incredible cohort and the journey that you've been on, and looking forward to learning from you all too. And I'd like to start off actually with a bit of an experiment. So I believe that our bodies hold a lot of wisdom, and that actually they know what is needed when it comes to our economy and our economic system. And so I would like to do a little experiment with you all to sort of just explore that claim. And so what everybody will need is just a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil for this. So if you can just take a moment to grab that, or if you can also do it on tablet or something if you don't have any paper or pen. And then just give me like a thumbs up or something once you have your materials. Good, great, wonderful, nice, good, great, perfect. I think that's everyone. I was trying to keep track of all of the thumbs up, but I think that's everyone. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna draw just a vertical line down the center of your page, kind of like this. Yeah, just do that. Yeah. Good. And in the top right hand, I want you to write the word future. And then in the top left, I want you to write the word present. Great. Everybody have that? Yeah. Great. Now we're going to start with the right-hand side. And what I want you to do is imagine a world that's working for everyone, for all people, for the planet, for non-human species, and an economy that's working for everyone. And I just want you to imagine that for a moment. Now, once you have got an image, maybe in your head, I want you to try to now drop down into your body. And if it's helpful, you can like drop your chin or put your hand on your chest, close your eyes, whatever feels like a good way to sort of drop into your body. And I want to ask, how does it feel in that economy that's working for everyone? And so when you've connected with that feeling, I want you to draw a symbol or a shape without lifting your pen or pencil. That represents how it feels in that economy. Give me a thumbs up once everybody has drawn that. Yeah? Good. Great. Yeah? Perfect. Okay, now we're going to move to the left-hand side of the paper. And how does the present economy feel? And so when you've connected with that feeling, I want you to once again draw a symbol or a shape without lifting your pen or pencil that represents how it feels in our present economy. And again, just give me a thumbs up or some, yeah, once everybody's done that. Great. Excellent. I think most people, looks like everyone is done then. So this experiment was created by some of my good friends at the Post-Growth Institute. And it's been conducted now with over like 10,000 people around the world, really spanning ton of demographic sort of differences in terms of age, nationality, race, wealth, gender spectrum, ideological leanings, etc. And interestingly, at least what they've found is really, no matter where they were doing this experiment, most participants ended up drawing one of 5 symbols or shapes for the future and one of 5 symbols or shapes for the present. So I'm just going to show you first what. So for the present, people tended to draw or something similar to these 5 shapes: a circle, an infinity sign or a wave, a spiral, sort of blobular structure, or a heart. And so I would love to see, can you raise your hand if you drew something maybe similar to one of those 5 images? Yeah, If it's possible, to like share the image that you drew just on the like on your screen share. I'd love to see them. Ooh, heart. Good. Ooh, yeah, circle, heart, peace sign, love it. Oh, I can't see Steph. But
It's a heart.
yeah, nice. I love it. Oh, great. Amazing. Spiral. Yep. Brilliant. Beautiful. Ooh, I like that. That's like a sort of clover sort of image. It's great. Um, okay. So most of us had a similar kind of one. And then for the present economy, folks tended to, wait, can you see this? Am I sharing right now? No, I'm not. One second. Tended to create one of these 5 shapes, either like a jagged sort of line, some sort of like pyramid symbol, downward arrow, or some sort of arrows, like rectangle or square, or just a sort of jagged amount of scribbles. So I'd be interested to see how many people had an image that was kind of similar to one of those 5. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Angry scribbles, jagged lines, pyramid. Nice. Mm-hmm. Love it. So I think, you know, what I would like to do before I even share anything kind of about the Wellbeing economy movement or provide any input, what I'd like to do is to sort of provide some space for us to move into some breakout groups to sort of just like discuss and reflect on the difference, right, between our embodied sort of understanding of what an economy that really works in service of all life, all people, all non-living beings versus our current economy. And so Olivia's kindly offered to help facilitate some breakout groups, but these are some prompts. I welcome, any sort of discussions you want to share, but some questions you might want to reflect on are, what are the symbols or shapes you drew represent for you about how you feel about the design of our economy? And how do the symbols and shapes typically drawn help us like understand some of the root causes of our current crises, as well as what we need to do to ameliorate them? And so we'll go into breakout groups for a bit, and then I would love for everybody to come back and just share some of your reflections, thoughts, insights that might have emerged from this exercise.
Is it possible for us to drop the prompts in the chat box?
Yes. Okay. That now.
Thank you.
Should I join a breakout group or stay here?
The music, and then climate, everything.
Yeah, fantastic. Is everybody back now?
We are all back together.
Yeah. Is it Ariel? Ariel?
Yes, either one, Ariel, Ariel, responsible.
Yeah. Wonderful. Would you mind like just kicking off, like sharing any, I don't know, insights, reflections, things you spoke about in your group?
Of
Uh,
course, I was with Tresher and Audrey, so we had good conversations, checked in on each other first, and then went right into the images. So one of the things that I would share is just like having those categories of what people most gravitated towards was kind of a little trippy. Like for me, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, and also like get out of my mind type
yes.
thing. So it was good, right? But then I think even though we had similar images, we had different meanings behind it, right?
Mm,
Thinking about the future, feeling welcome, feeling loved, feeling appreciated. Circular kind of came into play,
mhm,
being more inclusive. And then when we thought about, the present being a little bit more chaotic, hierarchical, so more, jagged edge, like triangles and squares where, certain people are valued a little bit more. So I think that's where the majority of the conversation was. But Treasure and Audrey, I don't know if y'all want to add to anything of what I might have missed.
No, that was perfect.
Thank you. Love it. Anyone else want to share any sort of thoughts, reflections from personal or from your group that emerged from the exercise? Sharing your pictures.
I think we had a similar group discussion or dynamic. I think most people had the first photo was some type of jagged, sharp, you know, figure, shape, or whatever. And I think for the most part, they represented the economy, how I mean, it's violent in the way that it structures, communities in a way that it facilitates. And that's why you see like the sharp edges, the jagged edges. Um, it's also hierarchical. So like
Mhm.
for me, I had the pyramid, but the sides are very sloped inward,
Mm.
points are very sharp to kind
Mhm.
of symbolize how the wealth is concentrated at the top. And
Mhm.
the bottom really doesn't have, much of a fighting chance because of the resources. And I think that most people, their future image was some type of curved, no real edges, no real sharp figures or whatever. But for me, it's um it's a clover. It's kind of represents like balance on the
Mm.
bottom, the left and the right, because
Mhm.
not all communities and peoples, necessarily need the same thing. Like as far as equality, they don't need the same thing. They need equity.
Mm.
So we have different needs. Um, so everybody doesn't need the same thing per se, but they need their needs met. And I think this shape represents like different needs in different communities having their needs met.
Mm.
So it's a clover. It's a rounded clover.
I
And
love that.
yeah, and I mean, and we talked a little bit more about, just nature of society and why, things exist. And we came to the conclusion of capitalism and blah, blah,
Mm.
blah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much what we got.
I want to hear more of the blah blah blah. Does anybody? Yeah. Let's let's get into it, Like what is, because
Yeah.
I'm really loving that sort of, like the violence, the sort of, yeah, hierarchical, linear, like sharp sort of ways of our current economy versus one which is more like balanced, holistic, circular. What does that sort of mean for folks in terms of how we can, like, what do we need to do to sort of like ameliorate the crises or the violence, do you think?
I don't want to take up too much space, but just a little bit more. I mean, what we specifically talked about on that question is like how, this economic system basically um, socially engineers communities through like scarcity, through, lack of funding, through these different means, and um, how that's not necessarily true to human nature because you go to different societies that haven't been necessarily engineered this way and people behave differently. Like you go to quote unquote poor countries or poor areas or poor neighborhoods and people are more willing to share with you, um, even though they have less. And
Mm-hmm.
we kind of attributed that to the fact that, they're socially engineered to share because they have to because of survival and they have empathy and they have more compassion because of the struggle that they're going through versus if you go to, more affluent neighborhoods or quote unquote industrial countries or whatever, Western Europe, United States, whatever, Australia, um, and you don't have any money, I mean, Go to a wealthy neighborhood and see how much they care about you not having money to buy this, the food or whatever that you need to survive versus going to a poor place. Somebody will share with you, So that's kind of what we talk about.
Yeah. It's really interesting. There is some like modern research which shows that like really wealthy people actually have less capacity for empathy. They'll like show pictures of people with like kids with cancer or like really like sad images, and wealthy people, your nervous system doesn't fire in the same way like when you have a response of empathy, which is fascinating. Like it actually, yeah, does something to our brain. Same way power does, sort of decrease our capacity for empathy. Anyone else? Thoughts, insights, reflections from the exercise on our economic system, how we can change it? Yes, Zainab, is that right? I don't know if I can hear you.
What time does the game start?
Oh, there we go. Now I can hear you.
I have to be there by 4:30.
Oh, I think you might
Oh,
not be talking to us. Okay, so thank you for engaging in this.
so sorry. Sorry.
No, 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 not at all. Do you want to share in Zainab? No pressure. Doing other things. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'll share. I'm picking up my daughter from home to take her to practice. I'm actually in the car. That's why I thought I was on mute. But apologies.
No, not at
But
all.
yeah. But I mean, I was listening in, and I think there's something to that the richer you are, the less empathy you are. But then I find that there are some philanthropic rich people that are out there. I know some of them, it could be for ulterior motives, to get tax write-offs. But, there are some people who are genuine and do give generously. So that is my thought on that one.
Absolutely. No, for sure. And this is always the issue, right? With any sort of like generalizations, right? And averages and any type of study. There's a guy here, Chuck Collins, who was some sort of heir to like the Oscar Mayer Wiener fortune or something. And he gave away all of his money because he knew he already had so much privilege, like an advantage just from like the get-go, right? And so I don't think that it's a universal truth, but I thought it was interesting research that seems to be coming out of the ways that, yeah, these systems can influence our capacity for empathy. So I'm going to switch now to just like share a little presentation with you all. I spent quite a bit of time after I got to learn more about this like cohort and all of the incredible work you're doing and sort of the journey you're on, trying to think about like what would be the most useful kind of input for informing the kind of work that you're doing. And I thought that the like trust and racial healing and transformation framework that you've been predominantly working on with was really interesting in the sense that it centers the importance of like narrative change so like squarely. And so this is going to be a bit of a quick and dirty, right? Presentation, but just trying to explore some of our dominant narratives of progress and the ways that they are very much tied to a certain economic supremacy and the ways in which these narratives and sort of linear ideas of economic growth or like stock market fluctuations, etc., like this narrative ends up perpetuating systems of exploitation and extraction, but really wanting to spend, a good amount of time too on sharing hopeful initiatives that are happening around the world and here that are really trying to change that dominant narrative and transform our economic system towards the more hopeful future that we're looking and that you all started to discuss and explore. So, so for me, right, I feel like we're in this moment where this is one of my favorite memes from the last couple of years, right? Where all of this just like crazy existential crises and threats and challenges that go on. But despite that, just like all that matters is the economy, right? Like how do we make sure that like the economy is okay? And so often as a result, we hear about it and we accept its sort of supremacy, but we don't really dive into like what is it? What's its purpose? What do we want it to be delivering to us? Because it tends to be shrouded in a lot of jargon and a lot of like often, at least in my experience, a lot of like white dudes talking amongst themselves in very theoretical kind of constructs. And so to start off with, I think to talk about any sort of economic systems change, it's important to start with that question of what is actually the economy. So when I Googled the word economy, the first image that came up was this one, which I think is similar to what many of us maybe drew as our current economy one, right? Like these sort of jagged stock market values, GDP growth rates, whatever, linear, hard lines. And it tends to be that we hear when the economy is talked about, it feels like this thing that's like abstract and out there beyond our control, governed by its own sort of laws and rules that we don't have a lot of influence over. But the reality is that like we are the economy. And so the way that I often describe the economy is it's just the way that we produce and provide for one another. It's the means and mechanisms by which we engage with one another and our natural environment to improve our collective quality of life. And so I love this image. There's this brilliant feminist economist, Neva Goodwin, who wrote a macroeconomics textbook, and she shows this image of the economy as economic activity. Like in the US, I think we often, when we think of the economy, only really think about business and finance. So the sort of business sphere, that circle, which is for profit, individual, like private for profit oriented enterprises or economic activities. But she found that that's really only, even in the US, only accounts for about a third of economic activity. Another third is what she calls public purpose sphere. And so that's, institutions and activities like by government or nonprofits or academia or, the type of work that is done of producing or providing things with the interest of supporting the collective whole or benefiting the collective whole with its major intention. And then critically, you have the other third, which is often invisibilized currently, but is like the core sphere. So the ways that we produce and provide for one another as families, as friends, as communities, generally non-monetary dimensions of like provision and reproduction, and is motivated by compassion and love and sort of like care for one another. And that those are all parts of the economy. And that our economy is just one aspect of our society embedded within a larger ecosystem. And so much of also the system of production provision comes from sort of the gifts and generosity and provision from our natural environment as well. And that our systems of production also then have impacts on that natural environment. And so when we think about, okay, this is the economy, the way we produce and provide for one another, we then think, okay, well, what's the purpose of the economy? And the thing is that for quite a long time, we have been defining progress and success purely in economic indicators or terms. So we've been really focused on economic growth, sort of our North Star. If we just keep growing, that's how we will reach sort of unlimited linear prosperity with it, despite if there's sort of jagged ways along the way. And economic growth really just means that we're increasing production over time. And we generally, you all might be familiar with this, but use the indicator like GDP or gross domestic product, which tells us sort of the estimated market value or price of all of the goods and services that are produced within our country or by our country within a certain period of time. And so the goal is always to just produce more. Yeah, like, and so if that is our goal, this is sort of our North Star. And so for this reason, that's part of why we focus, and a lot of economists tend to focus a lot on the sort of what Neva Goodwin calls the business sphere or the private for profit oriented sphere, because this was the supposed revolutionary insight of Adam Smith that it is our private, like selfish instincts by which we make profits that can be reinvested into an expansion of production, right? So the profit motive is what allows us to have continuous production and growth in our economy, and that is driven by our selfish instincts, not our benevolent ones. So it's good to encourage and reward those. Now, I want to just touch for a second here on the fact that a lot of the dominant narrative of like the Industrial Revolution of Europe, US, whatever, capitalist success is based in this idea that it was like, okay, well, it's the entrepreneurial spirit of these various enterprises that led to the global North's growth and development. And I like this quote by MLK, which very clearly says, right, like we're deluding ourselves if we think that that myth of capitalist sort of progress is based on a Protestant work ethic, because it was very much built on the exploitation of slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of poor, both Black and white, both here and abroad, right? And so there are a lot of now modern economists who are actually calculating how the sort of capital accumulation or the wealth that allowed for the rapid industrialization and economic growth in Europe was fundamentally through colonial extraction. So getting raw materials and ultimately using people as slaves, that only through that were they able to even create the sort of massive capital that ultimately allowed for their sort of the global North's wealth accumulation. So this woman, Uttara Patnaik, she's a Indian economist, did a recent research paper and showed that just in India, $45 trillion of wealth was extracted from India during colonial rule by the British. And like to put that number in context, I think in 2020, Britain's GDP was about 3 trillion, right? So it's like targeting a huge amount of extraction based on of nature of raw materials and of people in the form of slavery or other types of labor exploitation. And so throughout the 20th century, there have been a lot of scholars who have recognized that over the colonial period, the systems of racial hierarchy that developed with like white Europeans at the top, like Black Africans at the bottom, different races and genders, et cetera, in between, was very much utilized as a mechanism by which to legitimize the slave trade and colonial expansion and takeover of indigenous territories, and to legitimize that sort of exploitation and extraction of wealth over time. And so with this system, right, and this idea of this sort of economic supremacy that our goal is just, progress is production and more wealth, it allowed for the effective commodification of people and nature. So viewing people and all species and our land and our resources as inputs into the economic system, with the goal of all of our societies being to just produce more, generate profits, and generate incomes for our own survival, right? And this got sort of like put on hyper steroids in the 1980s, right? So this wasn't just a colonial project, but the idea of this economic supremacy, the focus on economic growth and economic indicators as our societal vision of progress, was very much fed by people like Milton Friedman and others who recognized that by centering purely economic indicators of progress, you could legitimize encouraging and rewarding the large investors, corporations, financial entities that were viewed as the most efficient at generating profit, right? Because the idea is that that profit is ultimately going to stimulate and expand production most rapidly. And so even to this day now, for every $1 in foreign direct investment that flows into the African continent, $3 immediately flows out. And so there's this guy, I know I'm throwing a lot of stats at you, so apologies, but there's a brilliant guy, Jason Hickel, who did a calculation. There was like 100, I think, and 42 trillion that has been extracted from the global south just since the 60s and taken into the global north, right? And so a lot of this is about systematic and intentional sort of structures and economic systems of extraction. And the moral justification of this orientation has been, okay, well, if we grow the economy, either it'll trickle down and make everybody better off through more goods, so that'll mean cheaper goods, or that increased investment will allow for job creation, which will create incomes for us, etc. Or worst comes to worse, we need economic growth so that the government can take some of that wealth through taxes to fix any of the damages that were done to people and planet in the process. So really, particularly since the 80s, it doesn't really matter if you're a socialist or a capitalist government, a Democrat or Republican, right? Like your major goal is economic growth. The question is just what you think is going to happen to it and what you think the role of the government is in sort of redistributing that or not. And so if we take, right, just economic indicators as our metrics of progress, we're absolutely crushing it, right? Like we should be all doing so well. So since, the 1960s, we've seen pretty much exponential growth in GDP per capita worldwide. The issue is that everything, actual thing we produce comes first and foremost from the earth, right? So continuous exponential production is going to invariably have severe negative consequences for the natural world that is making up all of those things. And similarly, we've seen, exponential increases in like stock market values and growth. And we hear about it all the time on Marketplace or whatever, like got to keep an eye on the stock market. But the issue is that that's not trickling down. And in fact, our system of financializing our global economy and our own national economy is just systematically concentrating and extracting wealth into fewer and fewer hands. So since the pandemic, 5 men doubled their wealth, while 5 billion people were made poorer, right? So the idea that it's like going to rise all boats is now becoming so obviously false because it's through this extraction of wealth from everybody else that the financial sectors are going. And I think what's even more critical is it's seeped into our culture where we sort of accept the idea that it's okay, that it's easier to make money off of money than off of actual work. And obviously that system is going to preference people who already have money to begin with, right? Relative to those who do not. And even the maybe last sort of indicator we talk about a lot as employment, right? Like, okay, well, is our economy generating jobs, which again is viewed as an output of the economy, not the driver of growth. We have seen increases in employment, but the issue is that everybody is miserable, and the majority of Americans feel like they have a job that need not or should not exist, meaning they are doing work that they think is contributing nothing to the world or actively making it worse off, right? So we have jobs, but like, jobs doing what, right? Like, how is that contributing? And so the good news is this fact is not lost on people. So Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, for example, was very clear that, we've gotten to a point where we cannot say when we see economic growth being accompanied by worsening social outcomes that that's success. It's clearly failure. But changing things is really going to require us to think differently, act differently, and develop different measures of success. And part of that is because, governments realize they don't have the resources to really deal with all the crises. But the major reason is because people are calling for change. So around the world, the majority of people now believe that capitalism is doing more harm than good, and also are losing trust in government and in democracy because they see governments as working in the interest of a small group of economic elites rather than the common good. But what's important is they don't just see the issue, they also see the solution. And so even in the United States, potentially one of the most like capitalist loving countries, 68% of Americans said that they believe the economy should work in a way that prioritizes the health and well-being of people and nature rather than profit and wealth, right? And so this realization is really at the heart of the well-being economy movement. And it comes under a lot of different banners. So there's like regenerative economy, solidarity economy, indigenous economies, donut economics, post-growth, degrowth, and many more. But at its heart is this core idea that we have to stop treating people and planet like they're here to serve the economy and start treating the economy like it's here to serve us, right? So rather than designing and utilizing people and nature as inputs for our economy, we need to start evaluating, downgrading the economy and assessing it in terms of how it's contributing to our societies and to our natural environment's well-being. And this is seemingly intuitive, but it's actually a pretty big shift because I think we've all been so trained to hold the economy as supreme for so long that we've gotten used to making the case, for example, of why health is good for the economy, rather than feeling like we can swap that burden of proof and ask, how is the economy contributing to our health? And is it, right? And so this shift is, at least for the well-being economy movement, really a core part of our mission and vision, right? Like, how do we build an economy that truly delivers on the things that we need most? And these are the 5 WEAll needs, or the 5 things the Global Wellbeing Economy Alliance sort of community articulated early on as different dimensions. And what that looks like in practice is that if we're clear, it encourages us to ask different questions of our economy. For example, does our economy ensure everyone has enough to live a life of dignity and purpose? Or does our economy ensure a just distribution of wealth, income, time, and power? Is it molded and directed by our active voice and participation? Does it support meaningful connections and right relationships between people and nature? And does it actively protect, cherish, and regenerate our natural world? And when we ask those questions, then we start to think about different dimensions of what we want these systems of production and provision to be delivering and how we will ultimately assess its progress. So I know all of that sounds like, yay, utopian, wouldn't that be great? So I will share, there are, like, it's happening, right? Like, and obviously maybe not as quickly or rapidly as we want, but we have, for example, the Wellbeing Economy governments, of which New Zealand is one, along with Finland, Scotland, Wales, Iceland, and Canada, who have all developed alternative national performance frameworks to GDP, so that they're assessing their national progress on the basis of social and ecological well-being kind of indicators. And I will just make a note that the first 3 government, like the founding members, were all countries with female heads of state, which I don't think is a coincidence, yeah. But there's a certain kind of paradigm shift which is happening. And so generally what they go through is a process of defining a new framework or a new vision of sort of success. And governments are horrible at communication, I will say. So they tend to create some sort of infographic like this. But it's important, like, they tell different stories, right? And I think when we think about the kind of stories we want to be telling in terms of our visions of well-being, to be conscious of how that relates to a relative relationship between different dimensions of our lives. So the one on the left is Canada's National Performance Framework. And there, for example, the environment is viewed as one dimension of well-being, along with health, good governance, society, prosperity, etc. The middle one is the donut economics framework. I'm not sure if people are familiar with this or not, but it sort of talks about how we need to ensure that everybody's basic needs and social foundations are met without exceeding planetary boundaries or limits. And so it views the environment as kind of a limit or a constraint on our progress. And the one on the right was developed by the Maori in New Zealand during the process of developing their national performance framework. And the green level there, that's the environment. And they view it as the foundation and source of all life, with spirit being at the center and then society being like coming from it. So they're different illustrations of what is the role of the environment. Is it constraint? Is it the source, right? Scarcity, abundance, etc. And so one of my favorite examples comes from Wales. And I'm going to give you, I'm focusing on policy stuff because that's just my background, but there are a lot of other dimensions of ways that the system is changing. So Wales went through a process of asking all of their citizens, what kind of Wales do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren? And on that basis, developed these 7 high-level well-being goals around equity, health, and even their definitions of prosperity and resilience. Resilience is is like biodiversity conservation, and prosperity is about an innovative, productive, sort of creative society, but that is within respects sort of planetary boundaries and limits. And what they did was they passed a legislation that required all government agencies to work collectively towards the achievement of those 7 goals, to set 25-year targets so that for the next generation in those various areas, to create clear milestones, and to require that any sort of decision had to go through and consider how it's contributing to those goals. So what this meant in practice was, for example, when they wanted to build a new highway, they had to make the case for how that new highway was going to contribute to their 7 goals. And when they couldn't make the case for it contributing to any of the goals, except for maybe one, they ended up putting a freeze on all new highway development so that they could take that budget and put it into public transportation and active travel instead, which they could say was going to support a more equitable, healthier, resilient, globally responsible, et cetera, Wales. This sort of post-growth, beyond GDP movement, I think, is spreading pretty rapidly around the world. In Europe, it's pretty strong. The UN Special Rapporteur for Poverty Alleviation and Human Rights is really trying to challenge the fundamental assumption that like economic growth is necessary for poverty alleviation. To be more clear, it's like growth of what and why, not just everything. And even when India was hosting the last G20, they really tried to advance this agenda as well. But I will say, yes, things are happening at the global level, but we can't sort of reproduce this like top-down, one-size-fits-all economic approach. I think one of the major damages of economics and of our discipline has been this, because if we think about the economy as a way we produce and provide for one another, then clearly that's going to be influenced by our history, our geography, our cultures, and many other factors. And so the design, the transformation, the journey, the goals are going to be different in different places. But what we need to do is ultimately, I guess, many people I heard like that point around collaboration, right, in a future economy, really centering that as opposed to these hierarchical top-down sort of systems. And so in the US, there is amazing movement happening. I think we're seeing like, you all might be familiar with some of these organizations, right? Like Liberation in a Generation or US Solidarity Economy Alliance, the growing labor movements, a just transition, many other types of movements at the national level that are trying to advance these kind of systems transformations. And I love this kind of image that was developed by Movement Generation and the Climate Justice Alliance around how we move from a like consumerist and sort of colonial mindset to more caring economy, moving from extraction to regeneration, militarism to deep democracy, right? So sort of these principles of transformation, and we're seeing them come into action. So for example, in Washington State, they wanted to develop a 10-year poverty alleviation strategy. And so, but they wanted to do it by bringing together all of the relevant stakeholders from across the state, right? So like tribal nations, government agencies, businesses, philanthropy, like labor unions, et cetera, et cetera. And what they did was they started to develop a plan, but then realized it's not really about poverty, it's actually about well-being. How do we ensure well-being for everyone now and for generations to come? And that this strategy, if we're talking about anything related to poverty, the real experts are those who are living in poverty or experience poverty. And so they decided to create a working group, really with those people with lived experience. And what they ended up doing was informing this new co-governance model of really thinking about transformations that are needed within the government system itself, to define well-being and to ensure more equitable power sharing systems that could actually lead to collect like broad-based well-being in the future. And they're the first state, at least that I'm aware of, that has actually used government funds to start doing community assemblies. So they're engaging with communities to inform strategies around economic justice, climate change, housing, etc., that can be implemented by the Washington state government. And so the last example I'll share before coming back to you all is in Hawaii. There's this initiative after COVID. Hawaii was hit really hard because, a lot of tourism and whatnot. And they wanted to inform the economic recovery efforts. And so a group of Native Hawaiians came together and thought about articulating some of their indigenous sort of values. And what they did was brilliant, was that they transformed into a way that like Western colonial maybe folks would find legitimate, and turned it into an Excel spreadsheet where they looked at those values and then ranked different economic development projects, initiatives, activities on a scale from like bad for Hawaii to supporting pretty much positive systems change in Hawaii. And this process has led to thousands of people really coming on board. It's now informing the state's economic development strategy. It's been adopted by the Hawaiian Tourism Board. And so we're seeing these sort of efforts, I think, across the US to do this redefinition of progress. And so I think there's hope in that. But for me, I think the major thing, if we can do anything, is just remind people that we are the economy, that we have the capacity to change it, that it feels so big, but if we can be a little bit kinder, with ourselves and each other, and a little harder on the system, we'll be better off. So I'm going to end here for now, and come back to you all and see if you have any thoughts, questions, or reflections on this.
Amanda, it's Audrey. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Audrey.
Hi. Can you remind us where you're based out of right now?
I live in Vermont.
Okay. Oh, that's right. The green hillside country of Vermont.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just have to tell you that was so refreshing. I had never really known what was possible. Like we just did the economy panel as a cohort last week, and it was quite ingenious, I must say. However, I think we kind of were all wrestling with what is a possible alternative to capitalism, and hearing some of what a lot of these Scandinavian countries and others have adapted, and even Hawaii after COVID. It's just so refreshing. So thank you for letting us be empowered like that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate you.
This is Zainab. I like that. I guess I'm gonna make it a quote now that we are the economy. I really like that, and I think that is so true. But how do we impart that to the rest of the community, the society, to help people begin to realize that we are the economy?
Well, that's the great question, Zainab. Like for me, this is why I was really excited to be with you all, right? So it's like, I think this starts with sharing, right? That idea. And then hopefully you can share that with others too. I think that I find hope because I actually think there is a lot more both embodied, but also even cognitive recognition in the US about the problems with our current economic system, at least. Maybe not as much like clarity on what we can particularly do about it. I think the challenge is just hasn't penetrated mainstream media and discourse or political discourse yet, especially if we talk about federal level. But the more that I don't know, I'm hoping that you all can help me too, right? To try to share this, to try to get more people on board with this kind of movement, because it's, yeah, we just need power numbers, really, of folks who are trying to work towards that type of transformation. I don't know, that wasn't a very maybe satisfactory answer, but yeah, that's what we're trying.
I love the answer. I have my hand raised, so I'm gonna just go ahead and go.
Yes,
I
please.
want I want to say thank you so much for the presentation. I'm over here like taking notes, like I'm a whole student right now. Like, okay, this is good, this is good. So I teach African American studies, and I really like the fact that you highlighted the triangular trade, and I also including an MLK quote. Love that. I'm stealing it. Just letting you know that now. But also I learned so much about like the 45 million trillion of wealth. I didn't know nothing about that. So you bringing these highlights to it, I want to just say thank you for that. Thinking about like how the five richest men have doubled their wealth, and us like I'm a full-time as professor out here, and I'm still struggling to pay rent sometimes, or living paycheck to paycheck. And that's me with a full career, right? So imagine other folks that are not as economically sound as we are. So how do, like you said, that circular motion come into place? I'm very, very interested in seeing that flourish. I love the fact that you showed us like the movements that are happening. So how do we connect with them, like the SEIUs or the law centers, New Economy Coalition? All about that, right? And for me, I'm about action and trying to figure that we're about to go into a whole nother administration, which is so, I'm not going to be mad right now. Anyways, we're still going to a whole nother world, right? So we have the rich Elons and the Trumps and all this other stuff, and they're going to make it better for themselves. Yet I don't know what that looks like, and I appreciate what you're talking about, how we be kinder to ourselves in this moment, be kinder to in the workspace. So going from the extractive economy to the regenerative. So I just really, really appreciate all that. But one question I did have, how do we get the big jobs most of us are in the big jobs, but like the little mom and pop shops or like the nonprofit spaces, how do we change that workspace in a way, or some tools that
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks, Christian. One thing, if anybody does, one recommended resource is there's this new, well, it's kind of new, but there's a podcast called Capitalism by Seen on Radio, which does a very cool sort of like history of economic thought, evolution of sort of the capitalist system and a lot of the different movements. And I think they did a really good job. So if you like podcasts and like that kind of perspective, it's a good listen. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot in what you just shared, to sort of like sit with. And I think about a lot too around like the narrative right now, right? It continues to be this idea that like the wealthy are the drivers of our economy, right? Like their ingenious or wealth will somehow trickle down to all of us. Like that continues to be the kind of underlining, I think, rationale of why we view them as legitimate leaders or like architects of our economy. And I think there's something really huge here around becoming sort of more authoritarian nationalist sort of systems that are going to come. Like democracy was always that promise that normal poor people have collective wisdom and the right to govern themselves, right? And so it's like, how do we get back to that notion of really that level of sort of self-determination and ensure that security? When it comes to sort of like more of the like mom and pop, smaller organizations, right? Like I think there in the US, what I've noticed at least is there's a lot more focus in the sort of like micro economy. So meaning a lot of emphasis on like cooperatives or like sociocracy or like different forms of kind of like operation and kind of management within our current economic sort of system. So I grew up in like a small rural town in Vermont, spent a long time working for the UN abroad and then came back, try to fight the fight here. But I mean, again, this is where we all need to be parts of sort of the vision of like, what is it that we really feel like we need to be producing and providing to one another, and how do we want to go about doing that, right? Because I don't think it's a problem for there to be a privately owned like small general store, right? Like, does that, I don't think everything needs to be like collectivized per se, but I do think what we need to do is to break up a lot of that big power and that concentration of wealth, and to even make space for that greater self-determination, so we can sort of redesign our economies. And I think that starts with being clear on what do we actually want? What do we think matters for a good life? And to hold that together so that then we can experiment with different types of economic systems and practices and see what works and what doesn't. Yeah. Beatrice.
Hi, thank you, Amanda. It has been great, a good reflection for me. I definitely know financial and economy expertise. Probably is my weakest knowledge. But just as you were talking, it reminds me, I follow up Rigoberta Menchú, and I really connect what you were saying with some of her words about, this concentration of economy or economics of this supremacy is creating poverty. I want to translate it, uh, humanity, poverty, or poverty, humanity. I don't know. Anyways, but this is the way that, how people gets corrupt, how people gets um, really in the how to be ambitious and have the power and through their resources, and then holding that power, and holding the power gives them the opportunity to be racist, to be, all the consequences of not being, of don't have that humanity um, as their own, as a priority. So I think I connected with that, in terms of, like, I work in a nonprofit sector. So I see myself like, I never do the things that I do thinking about if how much I'm earning. I know, honestly thinking like I should have more, but I never think about that. But I think it's someone who holds the power and holds all those um, non-humanity, um, economy or capitalism. It's very dangerous, and it can really hurt our communities. So is my question is goes to, like, how we can change that narrative to be more human when we have a very, like, surviving capitalist system, and then when the power is held by these very few and very corporative systems, it's difficult to focus in the micro sectors, so right, so it's a big battle.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if there is any examples of that.
Well, first of all, like, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna look up the woman you recommended as well. And so I think your first comment before you even started around, like, I'm not an economist, like, I don't have a background in, like, economics, finance, right? Like, that is a good thing, I think. Yeah, like, the hardest people that I like try to communicate this with is really classically trained neoclassical economists. There's like a lot of cognitive dissonance there. So the point is that the way that we spread this narrative, I think, is by having folks who come at this from different starting points and from different experiences and perspectives, sharing about these ideas without it needing to feel so, yeah, complicated, complex, like, to trust that sort of embodied understanding and knowing, and to try, yeah, to just connect in with other allies in the space. And it is, like, it is a big battle, but maybe to, like, for me, like, the reading of history, I like reading history when I'm, like, really bummed out, because one, it reminds me, like, things could be worse. Yeah, like, history is kind of a bummer to read. And two, there's so much we can learn from it, right? Like, in terms of the concentration of power, we had this before, and then there was a whole antitrust movement, right? And a competition movement and a breaking up, and everybody said it was going to totally destroy the economy if we broke this up, but we did this before, right? Like we've been here and we can do it again. And we can learn, I think, from the lessons in the past, right? And maybe build things a bit differently so that they can be a bit more, yeah, more checks and sort of balances on it. But anyone else? Thoughts?
I'm Steph. Well, it doesn't matter where I'm at. I'm in Minnesota, it doesn't, but I work with the American Camp Association on program quality and character, but there's also a movement that they are doing about well-being at camp because camp is been a kind of stressful place. They're also working on an outreach and belonging initiative because camp is also a white supremacist space sometimes and has a history of cultural appropriation. And you look back on it and you feel kind of lousy about camp in some ways. And camp has this incredible educational opportunity. Like when people feel belonging at camp, it is like it changes their entire lives. And there's research on this. ACA has tons of research on what camp does. And so I'm so fascinated by this, just thinking about well-being and this well-being economy and what does it mean for an entity like ACA to think about how is this an economic force, like a driving force that the whole camp industry could be promoting, because then it trickles out to communities and funders and like, and I think governments too, like local governments, and there's all of this. I just feel like I want to connect more on this and think like, what can we do kind of holistically with this moment in time that ACA is trying to put this all together. So I hope that there's a way to like keep talking about it because I'm just like, wait, we're this is it.
Yeah, I love that, Jess. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been sort of getting into recently is like with the epidemic of loneliness and all of that sort of focus in the United States. I was asked to give a talk on sort of economic systems and social connection. So the thing is that like research has shown that when we engage in gift giving, so just giving something to somebody else without any sort of monetary exchange, it boosts our immune system, it reduces stress levels, and it reinforces social trust. Whereas a market transaction, however seemingly benign, right? Like can seemingly a fair exchange, does actually the opposite. So it increases our stress levels, reduces our immune systems, and reinforces social distrust. So the fact that so much of our economic system is now increasingly subjected to market transactions, more and more aspects of our lives, it's reinforcing a process of social distrust, right? And disconnection. And so the research around the epidemic of loneliness and social connection is still pretty new. But one of the things this guy, Eddie Garcia, who runs an institution on this, said some of the preliminary research was finding that one of the most effective sort of antidotes is volunteering. And to me, that makes so much sense because you're doing that non-monetary mechanisms of provision, right? And so it was what solved for me one of the most interesting facts I learned a long time ago, that the quickest way to gain somebody's trust is to ask them for a favor. And that's so counterintuitive to our culture, right? For me to ask you for help actually makes you trust me more. Yeah. But we're like hardwired in this way to try to provide. And so what I'm thinking about when you're talking about this is the ways in which camp can be an example and a living sort of space for different forms of like regenerative relationship with nature, and also like more reciprocal and like gift-based forms of provision and care, right? Like, and so and seeing that and sort of, yeah. But anyways, that was a bit of a tangent, but I love that you're working on that. I never got to go to camp, but I would like to go to an adult summer camp. I think that would be really fun. Elijah.
Hi. Um, yeah, so my name is Elijah. I'm based in New Jersey, Trenton, New Jersey, and I'm um a member of the economy pillar cohort. And my work in Trenton is centered around working with others to create cooperative governance structures, and whether that's, business, business entities, community investment vehicles for businesses, or, real estate cooperatives. But um, and just hearing everyone speak, and I don't mean to even sound like pessimistic, but I feel like, and you were referenced, and I think others have referenced, like the micro economies and like the cooperative movement, and you actually mentioned something like just some type of governance thing, which I need to look into. But like, I don't believe that we're going to see meaningful, like, I won't say tangible changes, because because you can, like the smallest act of human nature can, you have tangible changes. But I do not believe that, barring some cultural, societal revolution of sorts, um, that causes some massive shift in, like, and just day to day, and people have to become uncomfortable, or the system must be just, disrupted in such a way in which, there's no going back to like normal, almost like a Great Depression type of thing. And I'm not wishing that upon anyone. I'm just saying that I don't see things meaningfully changing within our lifetimes. I feel like throughout the history of the US, um, the only thing that's brought about major systemic structural changes has been, has been through, sad to say, war. But and that's not what I'm advocating for here. I'm not doing that. Yeah, thank you, Joshua. Right, it's like the Civil War, like the Revolutionary War, and it was really grounded, and everything was grounded in economics, though. All the all free the slaves and all that stuff. I mean, and like, okay, but slavery was just a means of economic exploitation. So it's all rooted in economics, and I feel like the U.S. really understands, and I'm saying the U.S., but it's like Western culture, and like the hegemony, this, and like the culture here. So like, I'm part of like West Indian. I go over to like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and like even like the Western culture is kind of permeating societies over there. And I'm over there, and they're bumping Future and Drake, and and like no one like wants to farm anymore, even though the land is right there. They want to do all the American stuff. So like, for it to change elsewhere, I feel like it has to change here at the nucleus. And I think that we really need to, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, we need to disrupt the status quo. And it's not enough to just say, well, don't do this, oh yeah, and do that. I mean, it's like, so like you have Bill Clinton or whoever saying, oh, don't sell drugs, don't do this, do that. Okay, but like, it's not enough to just tell someone like what not to do. You have to provide the alternative, and also equitable access to the alternatives. And through our pillars, our collective pillars, the economy, segregation law, I would love to have a conversation about like what some type of like mass organization of, interests and strategies, like a confluence of strategies looks like. Other way, and I'm about to shut up in a second. Because like otherwise, like, I was listening to like MLK's Martin Luther King Jr.'s last speech, like the night before, he was killed, assassinated rather. And he talked about, the necessity of, okay, well, so if such and such workers are being exploited, or, so take your money out of these banks that support that company, take your money away from these insurance companies, so like divestment, right? And so I feel like there needs to be like a mass like divestment from these structures that are creating these cyclical conditions of like economic exploitation of our people, of our collective. And I'm saying our people as in just everyone, poor whites, blacks, brown, yellow, purple. It's a have and a have nots, as opposed to the black and white narrative that they keep us distracted with in the media. And that's just my 2 cents. Like, I would just, at some point, whether it's now or later, so I'd like to have a conversation with my cohort, and you're more than welcome to join us, um, about like what like a radical new world would look like. Um,
Mhm.
and it shouldn't even be like radical. It's only radical because it's so like antithetical to what we're all living in right now.
Mhm. Mm. Love it, Elijah. Yes.
Sorry.
To everything. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. 100%. And if you figure it out, let me know, like this is what I'm trying to do is like connect a wide range of different actors, like to build that sort of movement. I think your point around culture and values is huge. I think that it really is at the root of it. Like I remember I was doing a project in Mozambique and this economist was talking about how like, it's going to take them a while to change their culture to achieve development, meaning like to become as like entrepreneurial as we are because investors come to Mozambique, set up shop. People will come and work for a couple days and then leave and go back to their communities and won't come back sometimes for weeks, months until they need more money. And I realized in that moment that he was implying that they lacked a work ethic. What I realized is they had a culture that understood how much was enough. And I was
How much
like,
was
I
enough?
had no notion of enough, right? Personally, as an American, like
Right.
always ambitious, right? Like always more, even if it's not material, right? Like it's in terms of always striving. And I was like, oh, there's a lot more I have to learn than teach about actually building, yeah, as like regenerative, stable economy. But Joshua, over to you.
No, thank you, Elijah, for the comments. I agree. I think I posed a question in the group chat maybe a few minutes ago. Is it fair to say that the real antidote to capitalism is its overthrow and implementation of socialism? Scary thought, I know. But I mean, if you look at history, anytime there's a major break from one system to another, whether it be slavery to capitalism, it was called, I mean, the only way to move from slavery to capitalism was a civil war. And it was in that moment that once people who were once enslaved, who were property, their most radical moment in United States history was Reconstruction. When those same people who were enslaved became owners of the land that they were enslaved on. And they did that because of a war that ensued that they participated in and that they took up arms against the people that were enslaving them. You look at Europe, the history of Europe, from feudalism to capitalism, there were wars that were fought. You look at, I know in the media we like to demonize certain countries or whatever. Look at the Russian Revolution. Look at what happened in Tsarist Russia when it was the poorest, most backward country in Europe, illiterate, et cetera, et cetera. Look what they accomplished because of the Russian Revolution. Whether you agree, whether you don't, just look at the history. If you look at it objectively, look at the Chinese Revolution. Before the Chinese Revolution, poor, backwards, exploited. They had to have a revolution in order to even determine their destiny. And I think whether you agree with it or not, whether it's acceptable to say these things, whether it's, part of the liberal education system, the media, whatever it is, if we look at it objectively, if you look at Cuba before the Cuban Revolution, it was a large plantation. It was a plantation that belonged to America and these other places that exploited people that was no different than slavery. So like I think if we want to be serious about it's a scary thought to think about what is the actual anecdote to slavery or capitalism. It's an antithesis of it. It's socialism. I mean, all the tenets that we're talking about, they're socialist tenets, majority, owns in the means of production, the things that allow them to have a life and living, work, the means of production, who controls the schools, the education system, the economy. Is it a planned economy or is it a capitalist economy where profit is the motive? Or is it a planned economy where, oh, we need how many doctors? Or we need how many, I don't know, bales of corn to feed the people? So I just think these are things we have to like really think about and not be scared to say like we need the antithesis of what it is right now. And that's going to take something very, 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 very big, a way of, something that we can't go back to the way it was before. COVID kind of showed us that, but it was co-opted. But it's a scary thought, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
Oh, well, thanks for sharing, Joshua. And sorry, I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat, so I see there was like, some other comments. It's something, we had I brought a group of sort of different folks in the economic systems change space together in Tennessee, like right before the holidays. And we had this whole discussion around like political violence as a necessary mechanism of of system change. Like I'm an aspiring Quaker, so I'm a pacifist, right? I don't know that that's the right, but that is for me what I think both of my grandparents' fathers were prisoners of war during World War II, and I just like the intergenerational just sort of like trauma that comes from war. Like I really want to try to prevent. Just this is my personal reaction, right? But I get that in a violent system, right? Is violence necessary for its transformation? And I don't, I don't have that answer. I do know there is some literature that illustrates that the most effective form for like systems change is silent strikes, like when people stay at home and just refuse to engage in the system, everyone, right? Like that does a lot to actually topple and change a system. But there's a lot of different tactics, and I think it's about, figuring that out. And yeah, I don't know. So I tend, and in this, I would love your feedback actually on this from everybody. I personally try not to use a lot of isms, like socialism, capitalism, neoliberalism. Like I do a bit, right? But I feel like they invoke a lot of baggage and a lot of different understandings and things like this. So I don't use it as much, but I do think there is a pretty strong, growing anti-capitalist language and movement in the US, especially amongst younger people. So maybe it is a useful, kind of tactic. I'm not sure. But just wanted to also acknowledge the different comments in the chat as well. And yeah, Bhutan's gross national happiness 100% was a major inspiration for like the well-being economy governments like beyond GDP, a lot of that kind of movement. And so yeah, definitely. And thanks for sharing this around the circular Philadelphia. I don't know if anybody else wants to share. Oh, Elijah, you go to Quaker meetings too? Nice. Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, but any other sort of like comments or thoughts? I wanted to do a little like breakout group discussion, but I'm loving this conversation. So what I want to just I'll share with you at the end, just maybe something for you to percolate on in the future whenever you have some time. But any other sort of things people would like, thoughts, reactions to this? Any feedback on the use of the term capitalism? Just selfishly? Yeah.
I I just very quickly, I so try to stay away from the isms only because I understand that many people's understandings of the various terms and their applications is limited to what they receive in the education system, which was created by it's created by the same actors who it's in their interest to frame certain viewpoints and perspectives and ideologies a certain way to either antagonize or to advocate for them, depending upon their own self-interest. And then also but there's something that's needed, and I feel like so even though I would consider myself a socialist, right, Josh, I understand that socialism and how it's been applied over the years. There's various successes and failures in each of the various movements, and granted, many of the failures could be attributed to the U.S. and its partners in destabilizing those, in destabilizing those economies and those countries and inciting political violence. So who really knows what the efficacy of some of those movements would be if there were not these antagonistic factors who were fearing a more equitable world coming to destabilize them? That said, here in this country, because we do not necessarily control the narratives, or even at least we're not like so X, Twitter and even Facebook and Instagram, like they have mechanisms to silence and squash certain narratives and to deplatform people at the whim of whoever, government funding, deems it necessary to advance a certain interest and cause. So with that being said, I think that just finding ways in which finding different uniting points among people across the various political spectrums and ideologies, and just finding like what kind of unites us, um, through just our human nature and values and interests, is the way in which, even if we have our ulterior motives, um, in, we don't want to necessarily say that out front because people just latch on to one soundbite, and then that's how they'll demonize you. You know, you could say 1,000 things and everyone agrees, right? But then you say one thing where you mention one word and it's taken out of context, and all of a sudden it's in the newspaper, it's into this, it's into that, and then forget everything else that the movement was. And I'm saying movement, and I'm going to be quiet after this, but leaders, you know, we need a decentralized, and from my perspective, a decentralized method of a decentralized means of organizing where it's not based upon some savior, some individual who's at the forefront, because they take down that, or like they tarnish or assassinate the character of that one individual who's leading the movement, then it causes harm to everything else. But I do believe that we do need as I referenced before, some type of economic, social, cultural revolution, and it has to be across racial, ethnic, cultural lines. And across all isms, just humanism. We just need the human aspect of it.
No, absolutely. So I like my background was in like industrial policy, I think, as like Christina was mentioning. And so I worked with a lot of governments on developing economic strategies. And the thing that I realized was most important, which also sort of informs why I joined the sort of came onto the Wellbeing economy movement, is at least in the economic sphere, even the new economy sphere, like people are really intense about their ideologies and their particular frameworks or theories or whatnot. And it can be very difficult, I've found, to support collaboration if you just start with the economic starting point. But when you start with like clarity on, your longer term development goals, your actual vision of like what matters, right? Like for society, like what everybody believes is most important to achieve, if that's, like equity or peace or, like regeneration or whatnot. Like once you have clarity on that goal, I think that helps to this point around uniting a lot of folks that otherwise already start from a more like combative like perspective, and to open up and recognize that any of these sort of theories, they do influence our material realities, right? But they're also theories. Like what the ways that we're going to produce and provide from, or what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, is always going to be contextual, right? And so I think we can be inspired by a lot of these ideas, but it's for us, I don't know, I at least believe once we have clarity on what we actually want to achieve, that isn't just like growth for the sake of growth or like money for the sake of money, but like actually that higher level goal, that is a really critical starting point to that sort of transformative work. Yes, Doreen.
Again, you can go to whatever other activity you wanted. I just real quick. I think we do everything and anything. I think the whole like one strategy, one movement, one leader. I think that we have to remember that this is a country of 340 million people. So like even all the examples that you've shared, they literally are microeconomies compared to what we're dealing with, right? So I think I think you throw everything at it, everything, to literally the microeconomies, to how do we change some of the larger policy issues? How are we doing? Yeah, right. I mean, I really do think that that's, if anything, the movement is gathering as many movements, right? But again, we're in a very significant distinction, being a country of 340 million people and growing, right? The only other countries of comparison are like China and India, and it's like they're like not good examples, right? So we can use these models to an extent. I think we go into the communities and get people's experience, but we also have to be really careful of relying on them to have economic experience. This is partnership, partnership, partnership. But again, basic bottom line is like, I think we got to do it all. Like, and it's not just do a thing, and not necessarily wait. What do we do today yet? Kind of situation. Anyway.
Absolutely. I think that's brilliantly said. And also I think a good, I don't know, sort of summary, because I know I'm supposed to sort of end in about 5 minutes. So I just want to share with you the exercise that if you want to do it at some other point, like, and I agree with you, I think there is a critical need to just let's try whatever, right? Like try wherever we feel energy, creative passion, opportunities for these types of transformations. But I do also think there is this higher or this paradigm shift that also kind of needs to happen more broadly too, where I feel like often it can seem easier to imagine like a total environmental apocalypse than a different economic system, right? Like that sort of saying, like our imaginations end up being really constrained for some reason when it comes to the economy. And so one of the exercises is around sort of that flipping the script exercise of like us unlearning a lot of the economic supremacy that we've internalized in our lives thus far and reprogramming a different way of thinking about the economy and its purpose. So I gave that example of like, since this is a health organization, right? We're very used to making the case for why health is good for the economy, right? Like it's increases our productivity, like people's productivity, and so therefore will be good for production. It's going to increase economic growth. But if we flip that script and ask, okay, how is the economy contributing to our health? We end up thinking about a lot of different dimensions of what might matter, right? So think about time and access to medical care, about nutritious food, about social connection, about other types of things that we would want our economy to be delivering in order to like a natural, thriving, clean environment, whatever it might be, right? That would be important for our health. And so I would invite you to, at some point, think about the kind of work you're doing, right? So whether that's like as a professor, right? Like, is the point of education? Often we talk about how important and try to justify education for its contribution to the economy, but how does the economy actually influence our education, right? And how would we evaluate that in terms of its capacity for our love of learning or our continuous, like learning and education and development, right? So just think about whatever space you're in, because it's a hard shift. I was working with a woman for months, right? And she was like, don't worry, I'm going to put some quotes, because she works in the creative sector with like artists and creatives. And she's like, I'm going to put a quote and statistic about creative industries' important role in the economy. It's like, well, but how is the economy contributing to our creativity, right? Because the one thing that they found with a lot of the universal basic income pilots, for example, is the first thing that people do is creative artistic expression, right? And so anyways, I'll just leave you with that as a little exercise you can do or not. And then just want to say thank you so much for this. This was really amazing. You're all brilliant. I hope to be able to connect with you all in real life at some point, or maybe virtually again soon. And yeah, I'll hand it back over to the organizers. But yeah, lots of gratitude.
Gosh, lots of gratitude to you, Amanda. This was a phenomenal discussion. Thanks for the tools, the dialogue, the engagement, and taking us from head to heart and back. This has been great, and it's resonating in the chat as well. And I also think, well, not think, but I will say this has been an amazing session to bring us sort of to a close as we wind down sort of this phase of the COLI experience, where we're taking the deep dives into each of the pillars of the TRHT framework, and the pod group work that we've been doing, because we're getting ready to transition into sort of the next phase of the COLI experience, where you'll do some deeper work with a dyad partner, and we'll start to get into the action planning phase, and the visioning and the strategic, picking up the components and elements of the TRHT strategic process that we talked about several months ago, almost at the start of the entire COLI experience. So when we come back together in February, we're going to use that session to orient ourselves to this next phase of the COLI experience, revisit, the TRHT framework and that strategic process, so that we can move into the sharing of our action plans. So keep an eye out, leaders from our team, via email with some guidance on what, you know, the dyads and the working groups are going to be looking like, and what the schedule is going to look like for us between February and the culmination of your experience in October. So y'all have been moving right along, doing a phenomenal job, and looking forward to what is next. Any questions about what I shared? All right. Seeing none, hearing none. All right. Well, while we have about 9 minutes or so less or less before we close out, I'm going to invite Olivia to launch a session feedback poll for us. And if you could take a few moments as you're heading out to complete that survey, that would be extremely helpful and appreciated.